Kevin Kline once walked in a state that few in Hollywood could understand, standing right in the bright light of fame while carrying a heavy silence inside, as if he were living two parallel lives. One side was the artist who had just reached the peak after the Oscar, being courted by the entire film industry, while the other side was a soul that always felt he did not completely belong to the place everyone called movie heaven. In those years, he not only faced the pressure of having to maintain the spotlight, but also faced his own inner turmoil: stay to become a Hollywood icon or leave to keep the pure art he always believed in. Every time he stepped on the red carpet, he felt like he was putting on another role. The role of the star, Kevin Kline himself, while the real person inside was drawn to smaller stages where there were no camera noises but the profound silence of art. This split did not create loud tragedy, but it created a form of silent, prolonged, and hard-to-name pressure that always forced him to choose between light and quiet, between fame and identity. Even with that inner turmoil, Kevin Kline still achieved accomplishments that any actor would have to admire. He won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for his role in A Fish Called Wanda, a performance that was both humorous and sharp, affirming his outstanding ability to transform on screen. Before that and after that, he also won many prestigious Tony Awards on the Broadway stage, affirming his position as one of the leading stage actors of his generation. He was highly regarded through a series of roles in works such as Sophie's Choice, Dave, In and Out, and The Pink Panther, where he showed a rare ability to balance comedy and drama. Not only successful in film, he was also a monument of classical theater, especially with Shakespeare roles, where critics called him an actor's actor, an actor for actors themselves. Before we move on to the next part of the story, if you can feel the quietness and the full of turmoil choices of Kevin Kline, please hit subscribe and leave an emoji. That is a small way to honor an artist who chose silence instead of spotlight, but still left an indelible mark. After stepping away from the brilliant light of Hollywood and choosing to turn his back on the path that many saw as the peak of fame, Kevin Kline actually was not someone who began his inner turmoil only when he had grown up. Those contradictions had quietly formed very early, right in his childhood years in St. Claude, Louis, where he was born and raised in a stable middle-class family, lacking nothing but not so abundant as to make one get caught up in illusions of power or luxury. It was a perfectly normal environment, where values like education, hard work, and respect for art were placed above fame or social spotlight. His father was a music lover, a person whose spiritual life was tied to art, but not in the direction of theater or film. It was a quiet appreciation, and that deeply influenced Kevin Kline from a young age. In that family, art was not a path to becoming famous, but a part of inner life, a way to understand the world rather than to let the world see oneself. And it was in that environment that Kevin Kline gradually formed a very clear introverted personality, a type of person who did not seek attention, did not need recognition from the crowd, and even felt more comfortable standing on the edge of noisy places. When he was little, he was not the child who always wanted to stand in the center of the school stage or become the focus in group activities, but often observed more than participated, listened more than expressed, as if he always needed a certain distance to feel the world more fully. That separation was not loneliness in a negative sense, but like a natural choice of the mind, a preference for the inner world over showing off on the outside. While many other children grew up with the desire to be noticed, applauded, and recognized, Kevin Kline seemed not to carry that need intensely. He was not drawn to stage lights from early on, nor did he feel that his existence had to be tied to others' recognition. Instead, he gradually built his own separate inner world, where imagination, emotion, and observation became the center, where every experience was processed slowly and deeply. That inner world itself created a special foundation for his later artistic path. But at that time, It also made him a somewhat detached child who did not completely blend into the common rhythm of the crowd around him. His family, although not directly guiding him toward performing arts, unintentionally nurtured in him an appreciation for beauty and subtlety, which made Kevin Kline not see art as a means to achieve fame, but as a space to explore himself. What is worth noting is that throughout his childhood and teenage years, he never felt he needed to become the center of anything, and that very absence of that need made him develop a personality very different from the future star model that Hollywood usually creates. He did not grow up with the dream of being known by the whole world, but grew up with an inner silence where his own value was not measured by others' gaze. That very silence, seemingly simple, became the foundation for his entire later life, a life that always stood between two worlds, the world of recognition and the world of quiet, where he seemed to always belong more to the second one. When Kevin Kline stepped out of those quiet childhood years in St. Louis and entered adulthood, his life did not immediately turn onto the artistic path, as many later still imagine. Instead, he started with a very safe choice according to family and society's standards, studying architecture at Indiana University. It was a major with stability, clarity, and a specific future, a path that anyone looking at could say was the right choice. But right in that correctness there existed a very large void inside Kevin Kline, a feeling of not belonging, not connecting, as if he was walking on a pre-drawn path that was not meant for him. The technical drawings, the geometric structures, the rules of architecture could be precise on the rational level, but they did not touch the deepest part in him, where he always sought a more subtle, more vivid, and more emotional expression. In those school years, Kevin Kline began to realize one thing that he could no longer avoid. He was not living true to his real self. It was not because architecture had no value, but because he felt he was existing in a world where creativity was limited by rigid structures, while he craved a space where emotions could move freely. And then, a decision emerged. Not noisy, not explosive, but enough to change the entire trajectory of his life, switching to acting. What was special was that this decision came with no guarantees. There was no career certainty, no clear path to success, and no promise that he would be recognized. But that very uncertainty reflected the true nature of this choice, a choice that came more from within than from outside. When Kevin Kline talked about switching to performing arts, the reaction from the surrounding environment did not carry an encouraging tone. Family and acquaintances did not fully understand why an architecture student would abandon a stable path to step into a risky world like acting. In the eyes of many, it was not a step forward, but a vague trade-off, even somewhat reckless. Doubt was clearly present, not in the form of sharp opposition, but in questions, wary looks, and silences, carrying skepticism about the future. But Kevin Kline was not drawn into those reactions the way others expected. He did not argue much, nor did he try to convince anyone to understand his choice. Instead, he quietly stepped into a journey where even he himself could not see the full destination. Starting with acting, Kevin Kline did not immediately step onto the big stage or the wide screen. He began with very small steps, from learning techniques, from observing, from understanding that acting was not just expressing emotions but the subtle control between inner self and physical form. This was not a race to seek fame, but a journey of self-discovery through art. Each role, whether small or large, became a part of the process of shaping who he was, not as a star, but as an artist seeking his own language. What is worth noting is that during this period, Kevin Kline had no guarantees that he was heading in the right direction according to the usual standards of success. There were no big contracts, no Hollywood lights, no widespread recognition. There was only quiet persistence and a very personal belief that performing arts was where he truly belonged. While many others might be shaken by that uncertainty, Kevin Kline seemed to go even deeper into his choice, as if the external uncertainty only strengthened the certainty inside. The step away from the architecture path to the stage was not an explosive moment or a dramatic decision, but a slow yet irreversible shift. It was the moment a person accepted trading safety to pursue something he could not fully explain with reason, only feel with intuition and inner drive. And it was from that turn that Kevin Kline began the journey of an artist. Not someone seeking the spotlight, but someone seeking the most truthful form of expression for himself, even if that path could never be guaranteed by anything other than his own steadfastness in his soul. When Kevin Kline officially entered Juilliard School, the journey of leaving the stable path of architecture was no longer an experimental decision, but became an absolute commitment to a completely different life. Juilliard was not a place for vague artistic dreams, but an environment where every illusion was peeled away layer by layer, leaving only discipline, pressure, and the stark truth of the profession. From the very first days, Kevin Kline clearly felt that he was no longer in an ordinary educational space, but was stepping into a harsh competitive ecosystem, where every student carried the aspiration to become something greater than themselves, and where failure was not a possibility but a reality that always existed. In that environment, acting was not seen as a simple expression of emotion, but a technique dissected down to the smallest detail. Voice, breath, body movement, eye contact, the silence between lines all became subjects of strict analysis. Kevin Kline, with his introverted foundation already formed earlier, was not drawn into the showiness often seen in those trying to prove themselves, but instead gradually approached performing arts as a process of disciplining the inner self. Juilliard forced him to understand that talent, if not honed, would have no real value, and emotions, if not controlled, would become chaotic instead of powerful. The pressure at Juilliard did not come from any specific individual, but from the very atmosphere of the place. Every class, every rehearsal, every exercise carried an invisible but heavy expectation that you had to progress, had to be sharper, had to be more precise, had to be worthy of your position in an environment that only accepted those who could endure the intense intensity of classical art. Kevin Kline quickly realized that he could not rely on pure inspiration to survive here. He was forced to build a different kind of strength. Not noisy, not explosive, but persistent and highly controlled. It was in that pressure that his acting style began to form distinctly, an almost absolute restraint, where every emotion was held back long enough before being released at the right moment, without excess, without showiness, without letting emotion overwhelm the structure of the role. But beneath that increasingly solid discipline, Juilliard also brought Kevin Kline another experience, less talked about but with profound influence, a feeling of spiritual isolation. Among dozens of talented students, each pursuing their own dream, personal connections sometimes became fragile. Everyone was learning to become someone else on stage, but very few truly shared the inner feeling during that process. Kevin Kline, who had already been accustomed to his own inner world since childhood, went even deeper into the state of observing rather than integrating. He was not lonely in a negative sense, but someone who always stood at the boundary between participating and observing, between expressing and holding back, between blending in and separating. In the long practice hours, when the rehearsal light shone down on the school's small stages, Kevin Kline gradually formed a special relationship with silence. It was no longer the silence of the absence of words, but an artistic tool, a space where he could completely control the rhythm of emotions. He began to understand that the power of acting did not lie in speaking a lot or expressing strongly, but in the ability to hold back at the right time and release at the right moment. This was exactly what made him different from many of his generation, those who might seek attention through the intensity of expression, while Kevin Kline chose the opposite path. The less he displayed, the deeper, the more effective. However, that development did not come without a price. Juilliard was a place that pushed people to their limits, not only technically but also mentally. There were periods when Kevin Kline had to face feelings of self-doubt, when the artistic standards were so high that any small achievement felt insufficient. But instead of collapsing under that pressure, he gradually learned to accept that art was not a destination to be completed, but a continuous process of self-adjustment and redefining oneself. During his years at Juilliard, Kevin Kline did not become loud, did not become the center of any attention, but quietly built the foundation for his entire later career. From the rigor of the training environment, from the spiritual isolation, and from the almost absolute discipline in artistic practice, he formed an acting style that did not rely on emotional explosions, but on control, precision, and inner depth. And it was right here, amid the seemingly quietest and harshest days, that Kevin Kline learned the most important lesson of his life, that greatness in art does not come from being seen more, but from understanding more deeply the silence inside a person. Leaving the strict hallways of Juilliard School, Kevin Kline stepped into a world that was still far from mainstream spotlight, but was the place that shaped the deepest core of his artistic identity, the Broadway stage and classical theater companies. This was not a place for instant fame or widespread public recognition, but a space where art was judged by precision, discipline, and the absolute ability to control the inner self. Kevin Kline joined the acting company in the early stage of his career, where he and other young actors traveled through many cities, performing Shakespeare and classic works under conditions that were not always ideal, but rich in training and challenge. On that stage, Kevin Kline was not a star. He was a true artistic laborer, where every performance night was a test of the ability to maintain discipline in expression, voice, and rhythm. When he embodied Shakespeare's characters from tragedy to comedy, he did not try to make the role flashy, but focused on preserving the inner structure of the character so that each line was not just words, but a reflection of a complex spiritual world. This approach quickly drew the attention of the theater world, not because of loud standout moments, but because of the almost absolute precision in every acting choice. While the outside world of Hollywood operated according to the logic of fame, revenue, and image, Broadway operated on a completely different rhythm, where an actor's value was measured by the ability to maintain quality through every performance night, not by media appearances. Kevin Kline seemed to fit naturally into this environment. He did not seek attention from the mass audience, but sought completeness in each role. That was exactly what made him one of the faces highly regarded by critics and peers, a type of artist that people in the profession often called an actor's actor, someone other actors looked to for learning rather than for entertainment. Recognition began to come to him through the Broadway stage, where he won prestigious awards like Tony Awards, including standout roles in On the 20th Century and The Pirates of Penzance. These awards were not only recognition of talent, but also milestones confirming that Kevin Kline had reached an artistic level that very few stage actors could touch. However, what was notable was that even when standing at the peak of Broadway, he had not yet become a familiar name to the general public. His fame existed in a different space, a space of the professional circle, where recognition did not come with showiness, and where artistic value remained in its purest state. During this period, Kevin Kline lived in an almost parallel state. One side was absolute respect from the theater world, the other side was relative anonymity to the broader public. He was not someone who appeared on magazine covers or dominated the box office, but someone who stood behind roles highly valued for technical skill and depth. This difference did not create tragedy in the traditional sense, but it placed him in a very special position in the art world, a person honored for talent but not drawn into the vortex of mass fame. It was during this Broadway period that Kevin Kline's acting style was perfected most clearly. He learned to control the smallest movements, every pause in dialogue, and every emotional shift between scenes. The restraint he had formed at Juilliard was now elevated into a complete artistic language, where strength did not come from intensity, but from precision. He did not need to dominate the stage with explosions, but with the ability to keep the character existing in a truthful and consistent way throughout the entire play. Even so, even when receiving honors from the theater world, Kevin Kline still did not fully step into the world of mass recognition. Broadway brought him respect, but did not bring global popularity. He stood in a position that many artists both craved and feared, being highly regarded but not consumed by the entertainment market. And that fragile balance shaped him as an independent artist, someone not led by the need to become an icon, but by the need to maintain honesty with the performing arts. In the shadows of those Broadway stages, before Hollywood truly called his name, Kevin Kline had built the strongest foundation of his life. It was not the foundation of mass fame, but the foundation of pure artistic respect, where every role was a commitment to discipline, to the inner self, and to the heavy silence of an artist who had never needed lights to prove his value. After many years standing on Broadway stages where fame existed only within the art world and did not spread to the masses, Kevin Kline finally stepped into a moment that Hollywood could not ignore. The role of Otto West in A Fish Called Wanda was not only an outstanding comedic performance, but also a completely different explosion from the serious, classical image he had built on the theater stage. The character Otto was intelligent, arrogant, absurd, yet full of appeal, and Kevin Kline turned that chaos into a controlled form of art, where every exaggerated expression was balanced by extremely precise acting technique. This contrast made his performance so special that it could not be overlooked. When the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor was announced for Kevin Kline, it was not only a personal victory, but also the moment when the entire American film industry was forced to recognize him anew. The man once seen as a stage actor now stood at the center of Hollywood, honored at the highest level a performer could achieve. The awards ceremony lights, the long applause, and the recognition from both critics and the public placed him in the exact position many believed he would continue to develop, a global film star. From that moment, Hollywood began to see Kevin Kline no longer as a talented stage artist, but as a face who could lead major films, a name that could appear in a series of commercial projects and become the new icon of cinema in the late 1980s. Expectations for him rose quickly. Producers, directors, and studios began to envision a completely different Kevin Kline, an actor who could combine classical stage technique with the appeal of mainstream cinema, someone who could stand alongside the biggest names in Hollywood at that time and still keep his difference. But what made Kevin Kline's story puzzling to many was not that he achieved the Oscar, but what he did right after that. Instead of capitalizing on the golden moment to dive deeper into the world of commercial films, he made a choice that surprised many in the industry. He returned to the stage. There was no loud statement, no direct denial of Hollywood, but his choice carried a clarity stronger than any words. Kevin Kline did not step onto the path of becoming a movie superstar according to the industry's expectations. He did not turn the Oscar into a springboard for a dense blockbuster career, nor did he try to maximize his fame in commercial films. Instead, he returned to the place where he always felt he belonged, the theater stage, where art was not valued by box office revenue or media campaigns, but by the pure quality of performance and direct connection with the audience. This decision created a strange silence in Hollywood. It was not public opposition, not a noisy controversy, but a void of unanswered questions. How could an actor who had just won an Oscar not seize the opportunity to become the central face of mainstream cinema? Why would someone standing at the peak of fame choose to step back from the spotlight instead of moving deeper into it? For many in the industry, it was a choice that went against the ordinary logic of an artist's career. But for Kevin Kline, it was a decision consistent with the entire path he had taken up to that point. While Hollywood expected him to become a new icon, Kevin Kline seemed never to have viewed the Oscar as a starting point for changing the very nature of his profession. For him, the award was recognition for a specific role, not a license to alter the artist inside himself. And it was precisely this difference in perspective that created a quiet but profound turning point in his career. Instead of expanding himself toward the mainstream, he pulled back, returning to artistic spaces where he had better control, where subtlety and discipline remained the core values. Kevin Kline's Oscar moment therefore did not become the starting point of a cinematic empire, but rather a paradoxical milestone. The peak of fame led to a deliberate withdrawal, and from there, his image in the eyes of Hollywood began to take on a different hue, not as a rising star according to the usual standards, but as an artist who chose his own path, even when that path did not lead to commercial dominance. After the Oscar moment that seemed like it would open all the doors of Hollywood, Kevin Kline entered a phase where the film industry began to look at him with increasingly clear bewilderment. He still appeared in commercial film projects, still took part in big-budget works, but the way he engaged with that world was not like the ordinary expectations for an actor who had just reached the peak of fame. Instead of taking advantage of the golden moment to become the face of blockbuster films, he chose a slower rhythm, chose roles with deeper inner dimensions, rather than roles designed to dominate the box office. In the years after A Fish Called Wanda and the Oscar win, Kevin Kline appeared in some commercial films, but never placed them at the center of his career. He took part in projects like Dave, In and Out, or The Pink Panther, films with high entertainment value, but even in these roles, he still maintained the acting style that had been formed from the stage and Broadway. Restrained, controlled, and always with a layer of inner depth beyond what the audience saw on the surface. This made him an actor who was hard to pigeonhole, but also hard for the mainstream film market to exploit in the direction of a commercial star. Hollywood at that time operated according to a very clear logic. Winners of major awards were usually pushed into the star system, where they became the face representing film brands, appeared heavily in the media, and led high-revenue projects. But Kevin Kline did not follow that trajectory. He did not dive deep into star image-building campaigns, did not appear with thick frequency in entertainment media, and did not try to position himself as a leading man according to proper Hollywood standards. This absence was not a public rejection, but a natural non-integration, as if he always stood slightly off the central orbit of this industry. The gap between public expectations and Kevin Kline's personal choices began to become clearer over time. The public saw an actor with diverse acting abilities who had won an Oscar, and expected him to continuously appear in big films, iconic roles, images with global reach. But Kevin Kline chose roles that he felt had more artistic value than commercial value. He did not chase the repetition of success, nor did he try to turn himself into a fixed film brand. Instead, he continued to move between stage and cinema, between big projects and choices with deeper personal meaning. This created a special image in the eyes of Hollywood. An actor who did not fully belong to the system in which he existed. He was not a missing star, nor a mainstream icon who continuously appeared in the media, but an artist existing on the edge of both worlds. He was respected in professional circles, highly regarded for his technique, but never fully drawn into the whirlwind of commercial fame. It was precisely this not fully belonging that made his career difficult to define, but it was also what made him special in film history. While many actors of the same era used the Oscar as a stepping stone to expand their influence and consolidate their position in Hollywood, Kevin Kline maintained a certain distance from that very system. He did not turn the victory into a long-term strategy for market dominance, but saw it as an artistic milestone in his personal journey. And this way of looking at things made him different, not in a loud and flashy direction, but in a quietly separating way from the main flow of the industry. Hollywood, in Kevin Kline's eyes, was not a place where he was rejected, nor a place where he failed. It was a space he could step into, work in, and leave in his own way. He was not swallowed by it, but he also did not fully dissolve into it. This balance, which seemed stable, carried within it a form of silent tension, The existence of an artist always standing between two worlds, one world of mainstream fame and one world of pure art. Because of that, Kevin Kline gradually became the image of an actor who did not follow Hollywood standards. He was not someone who chased the lights, but he was not completely standing outside them either. He was present just enough to be recognized, but not enough to be assimilated, and in that space, his career continued to develop in a very personal way, without noise, without explosion, but persistently and consistently with the initial choice of a person who had never seen fame as the ultimate goal of his life. After the phase in which Hollywood had once tried to place Kevin Kline at the center of the star system, he continued to do what few in this industry could fully explain. He gradually withdrew from the media spotlight, not with a big announcement, but with a slow disappearance from the spaces that were considered mandatory for a famous actor. There were no scandals, no public conflicts, no image-breaking moments, only a consistent choice to live further away from the noisy pulse of Hollywood. Over time, Kevin Kline appeared less in entertainment programs, minimized participation in personal promotional campaigns, and was almost no longer a regular face in the media whirlpools that always followed film stars closely. While many actors of the same era built their personal brands through interviews, red carpets, and continuous presence in the media, he chose to let the work speak for itself. This did not make him disappear from the industry, but made his presence different. Not noisy, not continuous, but always carrying weight whenever he appeared. Kevin Kline's life gradually separated from the characteristic rhythm of Hollywood. He was not drawn into the vortex of events, did not live in a state of always having to be there to maintain public recognition. Instead, he built a life oriented towards stability, where art was not a tool to maintain fame, but a selective choice, carried out with careful consideration. The projects he participated in became fewer, but each project carried a clear imprint of personal choice rather than market pressure. This separation did not carry the appearance of a withdrawal in disappointment, but rather resembled a way of reorganizing the entire life around art. Kevin Kline never stopped working, but he worked at his own pace. The Broadway stage continued to hold an important role in his journey, where he returned periodically not to recapture the spotlight, but to maintain a direct connection with the most original form of art he had ever pursued. In the stage space, where there was no interference from mass media, he remained a pure actor, where every role was judged by presence and depth, not by commercial reach. While Hollywood increasingly became dependent on image, brand, and the continuous presence of stars, Kevin Kline chose the opposite path, maintaining his career in a state of quietness. He did not turn himself into an entertainment brand, did not build an image based on showiness, and did not try to maintain a certain level of fame at all costs. Instead, he let his career exist like a slow flow, where each role was a meaningful stop, not a step in the race for fame. This varied choice made Kevin Kline become a phenomenon that was hard to define in the film world. He did not belong to the group of stars who always appeared densely on screen, nor to the group of artists who completely withdrew from the industry. He existed in an intermediate state, where his career was maintained not by the pressure to always be present, but by steadfastness to his personal artistic values. This created a special form of professional silence. He still worked, still made films, still appeared on stage, but not in the way Hollywood usually expected from someone who had once reached the peak of fame. As time went on, Kevin Kline's image became increasingly associated with separation from the glamorous rhythm of the film industry. He was not someone who lived in media races, not a face that always appeared on entertainment magazine covers, and not someone who continuously sought public attention. Instead, he became the image of an artist who chose mental stability over the expansion of fame. In an industry where frequent presence was seen as a condition for existence, Kevin Kline proved the opposite. An artist could still exist, even be deeply respected, even when not living under constant lights. And it was precisely in that quietness that his career continued to develop in a very personal way, not dominated by the cycle of fame, not forced by the market, but shaped by a consistent choice made very early, keeping art at the center and letting fame come or go on its own terms. While Kevin Kline's career gradually took shape as an artistic journey separate from the noisy pulse of Hollywood, his personal life also moved in a similar direction, where fame was no longer the center and peace became the value given absolute priority. When he met and later married Phoebe Cates, a female actress who had been widely known in the 1980s, many people once expected this to be the union of two Hollywood stars, appearing together in the spotlight, maintaining their positions in the entertainment industry together. But reality went in a completely different direction. Quieter, more discreet, and almost entirely opposite to the logic of fame. Both Kevin Kline and Phoebe Cates made a rare choice in the entertainment world. They gradually withdrew from Hollywood right when they were still at a point where they could maintain widespread fame. There was no breakup, no image collapse, no retreat because of professional failure, but rather a proactive decision to build a life not dominated by media pressure and public expectations. While many couples in the entertainment industry struggled to balance career and personal life, Kevin Kline and Phoebe Cates chose to put family above all the glamour they could achieve. They moved to live in New York, away from the center of the film industry in Los Angeles, where the presence of stars was always monitored by entertainment media. New York, with its diverse rhythm of life and less dominated by celebrity culture, became a more suitable space for them, where they could live as ordinary people rather than public figures. There, Kevin Kline was not the Oscar winner in the eyes of neighbors, and Phoebe Cates was not the face that had once appeared in famous films of the time. They became a truly normal family, where life did not revolve around red carpet schedules or film promotion campaigns. This choice was not just a geographic change, but a complete restructuring of how they viewed the value of life. In an industry where fame was often seen as the highest measure of success, Kevin Kline and Phoebe Cates built their family based on a different value system: stability, privacy, and sustainability. They did not chase maintaining their image in front of the public, did not put pressure on always appearing, and did not turn their personal life into part of an entertainment brand. Over time, Phoebe Cates also completely left her acting career, shifting toward business life and family care. This decision did not cause noise, did not create controversy, but carried very great meaning in the context of Hollywood, where leaving the spotlight while still having the ability to be famous was rare. Kevin Kline, instead of continuing to maintain the image of a famous couple, built together with his wife a separate living space, where their children could grow up without being defined by their parents' fame. What was notable was that throughout those years, both Kevin Kline and Phoebe Cates maintained a clear distance from entertainment media. They did not participate in interviews that exploited private life, did not appear frequently on celebrity magazines, and did not turn family life into a public topic. This silence was not avoidance, but a deliberate choice aimed at protecting the boundary between art and personal life. In the Hollywood environment, where the line between public and private was often blurred, their choice became even more special over time. They did not use fame to expand social influence, nor did they let fame dominate the way they live. Instead, they maintained a rhythm of life that was almost opposite to the image of a star couple. Not ostentatious, not noisy, not continuously appearing, but stable and sustainable. Family became the center of every decision, not career or fame. Kevin Kline continued to participate in artistic projects according to personal choice, but always in balance with family life. The roles he accepted were considered not only artistically, but also in terms of their impact on the stability of private life. Phoebe Cates also maintained a similar role, keeping the family space from being invaded by the pressure of the entertainment industry. Over time, their image in the eyes of the public was not that of a typical Hollywood couple, but a rare case of two artists who had once been at the center of fame but consciously chose to leave it. They did not trade their careers in failure, but adjusted them to fit a different value that was more important: peace. This peace allowed Kevin Kline to continue living and working as an artist unbound by the pressure to maintain a star image. He did not turn his family into part of a public brand, but kept it as a space completely separate from the film world. This choice, quiet but steadfast, shaped not only his personal life, but also reinforced the image of an artist who always placed stability and inner depth above all external glamour. In a family where both father and mother had once stood very close to the center of Hollywood but chose to step out of it, Kevin Kline and Phoebe Cates' way of raising their children also carried a consistent spirit, not turning fame into an imposed legacy. When their son, Owen Kline, grew up, he was not directed as a next-generation star, nor placed under pressure to continue his parents' spotlight. Instead, their family built an environment where personal choice came first, and art, if it appeared, had to be a natural impulse, not an expectation shaped from the outside. Kevin Kline understood very clearly the downside of fame, not in the noisy way of scandals or tragedies, but in a quieter way. The constant invasion of private life, the pressure to maintain an image, and the risk of losing personal identity in the public eye. That was why, when looking at his children's generation, he did not see them as potential Hollywood heirs, but as completely independent individuals with the right to decide for themselves how they wanted to live their lives. That freedom became the most important foundation in how their family operated. A foundation not based on fame, but on respect. Owen Kline grew up in an environment not surrounded by the showiness of the entertainment industry. Even though he had parents who were familiar faces in cinema, his daily life was not dominated by red carpet schedules or media interviews. Instead, it was a relatively normal life, where art existed as part of family culture rather than as an imposed profession. This created a natural distance between Owen and the mainstream entertainment industry system. When he began to take an interest in film and creativity, it was not a matter of inheritance, but a personal choice that developed in its own direction, independent of his parents' established path. What was notable was that Kevin Kline and Phoebe Cates never used their fame as a tool to pave the way for their children in the industry. They did not create ready-made opportunities, did not direct their children according to any success model based on the family name, and did not turn Owen into part of the Hollywood story. This silence was not a lack of care, but a deliberate choice aimed at protecting their children's right to develop freely, so they would not be defined by the glamour their parents had experienced. While many families in the entertainment industry unconsciously passed on the pressure of fame to the next generation, Kevin Kline's family created an environment that was almost completely opposite. There, success was not measured by the level of fame, but by satisfaction with the personal path chosen. This allowed Owen Kline to approach art if he chose to pursue it from a different angle, not as a race into the center of Hollywood, but as an open creative space where there was no need to repeat anyone else's path. When Owen Kline entered the field of art, he did not follow the big industry system right from the start. His choices carried a high degree of independence, leaning towards small projects, personal works, and creative spaces less dominated by the mainstream market. This clearly reflected the family's influence, a priority given to depth over scale, to authenticity over popularity. Kevin Kline did not interfere with his son's career direction, but the way he lived separate from Hollywood, choosing the stage over fame, became a wordless lesson about how art could exist without needing continuous public recognition. Their family environment, therefore, became a rare form of safe zone in the entertainment world. There was no hidden competition, no pressure to become the next version of a star, and no expectation that fame had to be maintained across generations. Instead, there was calm in the way they viewed life, where each person was allowed to define their own value without comparing it to the industry's standards. Over time, This tradition of living discreetly did not stop with Kevin Kline and Phoebe Cates, but continued to extend to the next generation. It was not a set rule, but a lifestyle formed naturally, staying away from showiness, keeping distance from entertainment media, and prioritizing privacy over attention. In an industry where continuous presence was often seen as a condition for existence, their family proved the opposite. It was possible to live, create, and exist without needing to constantly appear before the public, and it was precisely in that silence that a different kind of legacy was formed. Not a legacy of fame or awards, but a legacy of choice, the choice not to be defined by external light, but by inner stability. A family that had once stood very close to the center of Hollywood, but ultimately chose to stand outside it, and in that standing outside, they created a rare way of living with art, but not being swallowed by industrial art. Throughout a career spanning Broadway and Hollywood, Kevin Kline gradually formed a position that was very hard to define in the eyes of the film industry, an actor who was absolutely respected for his technique, but was never framed as a true commercial star. When he took on increasingly complex roles, his choices no longer revolved around expanding media coverage or maximizing box office appeal, but around a much more personal question, whether that role had enough depth to be worthy of his time and energy. From that, a form of intellectual acting began to form clearly in his career, where each role was not just an entertainment product, but an artistic problem that needed to be decoded from within. While Hollywood increasingly operated according to market logic, where projects were designed to attract mainstream audiences and optimize revenue, Kevin Kline went in the opposite direction. He did not actively reject Hollywood, but he also did not optimize the commercial potential that this industry could bring. The roles he chose often did not lie at the center of mainstream trends, but on its edges, where scripts were more complex, characters had more layers, and box office impact was not the deciding factor. This made him a special case, an actor with the ability to reach a wide audience, but who did not use that ability as a tool to expand his commercial influence. This choice gradually created a clear distance between Kevin Kline and Hollywood's mainstream trend. While film studios sought faces that could guarantee revenue, be easily accessible, easily promoted, and easily positioned in the global market, Kevin Kline continued to attach himself to characters with inner qualities, stories that were not always immediately accessible, and roles that required audiences to observe more than react instantly. This sometimes caused him to be seen as an actor who was not entirely suitable for the mainstream star system, not because of a lack of ability, but because he did not fully participate in the industry's commercial game. However, not maximizing commercial potential did not mean his career lacked success. On the contrary, Kevin Kline maintained a very high level of respect in professional circles, where the value of acting was not measured by revenue but by the depth and precision of each artistic choice. He became one of the typical examples of the kind of actor Hollywood always respected but never quite knew how to use in its commercial system. An artist who could elevate any role, but was not easily turned into a mainstream market icon. For many decades, Kevin Kline maintained the acting style that had been formed from Juilliard and Broadway, disciplined, restrained, and rich in inner life. He did not rely on emotional exaggeration or explosive expressions to attract audiences, but on precision in every gesture, every silence, and every smallest psychological shift of the character. This created a form of static acting, where strength did not come from the degree of showiness, but from the depth of control. The difference between artistic value and commercial value in Kevin Kline's case became clearer when looking at the way Hollywood operated. Commercial value required accessibility, mass appeal, and the ability to spread quickly and strongly. Meanwhile, the artistic value that Kevin Kline pursued required slowness, subtlety, and sometimes being not immediately graspable. This did not create direct conflict, but it created a natural distance between him and the main flow of the industry. Not a few times this choice put him in a hard-to-understand position in the eyes of some outside observers. But in the circle of artists and professionals, Kevin Kline was seen as a different standard. The standard of loyalty to art rather than the market. He did not chase changes in trends, did not adjust his style to fit momentary tastes, and did not turn himself into a replaceable product in the mass film production system. Over time, his career became a kind of separate orbit, not exploding in the way Hollywood usually expected, but also not declining according to the cycle of fame. It maintained a rare stability, built on the foundation of personal choice rather than market pressure. And it was precisely in that stability that the price of intellectual acting gradually became clear. It was the trade-off between the level of popularity and artistic depth, between becoming a mainstream icon and keeping one's creative identity intact. Kevin Kline, throughout that entire journey, never tried to explain his choices in the way the industry easily accepted. He did not need to prove that he was right, nor did he try to justify his difference. He simply continued to work in the way he believed was right for art, even when that meant standing outside a large part of the fame system that Hollywood offered. And that very steadfastness turned him into a special case. An actor whose value lay not in the level of coverage, but in the immeasurable depth of each role he left behind. In an industry where many actors' careers were often defined by explosive moments of box office record-breaking film, a shocking scandal, or an image that became a mainstream cultural icon, Kevin Kline existed as an almost unclassifiable exception. His career had no sharp falls, nor did it have continuous peaks following one another in the typical Hollywood narrative. Instead, it stretched like a stable straight line. Not showy, but persistent. Not noisy, but always respected. In a world where explosion was often seen as a sign of success, Kevin Kline represented a different kind of success. Long-term existence without needing to break oneself to maintain attention. There were no major scandals attached to Kevin Kline's name. He did not appear in media crises, was not drawn into public controversy whirlpools, and did not build his personal image based on shock value or sensationalism. This made his career lack the negative highlights that Hollywood sometimes unconsciously used to shape a star's story. But at the same time, the very absence of those incidents created a rare image. An actor existing in the entertainment industry without needing chaos to maintain attention. Kevin Kline also did not experience the continuous superstar state that many Oscar-winning actors often had. After the peak moment with A Fish Called Wanda, he did not enter a cycle of repeating leading roles in one blockbuster after another, nor did he become a box office-dominating face for a long period. Instead, his career developed at a slower pace, where each project was a separate choice, unbound by the expectation to maintain star status at all times. This meant he was never overexposed in the public eye, but it also meant he was never framed as a mainstream icon in the traditional sense. Kevin Kline's career therefore carried a special kind of stability, no prolonged explosion, but also no clear decline. He was always present in the film and stage industry, but that presence was not dominating. It was like a persistent flow where he continued to work at his own pace, choosing projects based on artistic value rather than commercial level. This made him one of the rare cases who could maintain a long career without needing to constantly reposition himself to fit the changing trends of the market. Kevin Kline's fame therefore existed in a very special form, not mainstream fame spreading widely across all media platforms, but a fame of respect within the artistic community. He was not a name that appeared continuously in mainstream cultural discussions, but an actor always mentioned with respect in professional circles. This was a form of fame that did not depend on coverage, but on the quality and consistency of an entire career. In many film and stage environments, Kevin Kline was often referred to as an actor's actor. This phrase did not carry a distant meaning, but one of honor. It pointed to artists whose technique, subtlety, and depth of acting were recognized and learned from by fellow professionals themselves. He did not need to become the representative face of Hollywood to be highly regarded, because his value was established right within the artistic community. Other actors looked at the way he handled roles, the way he controlled emotions, and the way he maintained restraint in every expressive choice as a professional standard. What was special in Kevin Kline's career was that he never tried to turn himself into a typical success story of Hollywood. He did not follow the familiar progression model from stage artist to film superstar, then maintaining that position with a series of big commercial films. Instead, he existed in a parallel form, both a film actor and a stage artist, but not fully assimilated by any system. This very lack of explosion created a rare kind of sustainability. His career was not defined by a single period, not limited by a short golden era, and not ended by a clear decline in fame. It stretched along a stable curve, where artistic value was maintained continuously, rather than being pushed up and then collapsing in cycles. In the context where Hollywood often honored rise and fall stories, Kevin Kline was almost a case with no fall and also no explosion. His career did not create explosive peaks, but it also did not leave gaps of collapse. It simply existed, solid and consistent with the initial choice, placing art above fame and placing inner sustainability above the explosion of fame. When Kevin Kline passed the age of 70 and gradually approached the milestone of 78, the rhythm of his life no longer carried the appearance of the busy years between Broadway and Hollywood. Instead, his life shifted to a slower, quieter state, as if every movement was restrained to suit a period where time was no longer measured by the number of projects, but by the quality of each living moment. After many decades standing between two worlds, stage and cinema, he began to gradually reduce the number of films he participated in. Not because he was pushed out of the industry, but because he himself actively narrowed his professional space. At this stage, Kevin Kline no longer appeared regularly in major film projects. Invitations still came, his fame was still there, but his choices became stricter than ever. He only accepted roles that he felt truly had meaning, roles not pressured by the market, and projects that allowed him to maintain the full integrity of his art. This made his presence in cinema become sparse, but every time he appeared it carried its own weight, as if he only returned to the screen when there was something that truly needed to be said. Alongside the gradual reduction in film, Kevin Kline also returned to the stage selectively, no longer the continuous performance periods like in his youth, but carefully considered appearances, where he returned to the space he had been most deeply attached to throughout his professional life. The Broadway stage, with its characteristic silence and the directness between actor and audience, became the place where he found inner balance again. There, he did not need the amplification of the camera or the spread of the media. Just one role, one theater hall, and one moment of direct connection with the viewers was enough for him to continue maintaining his link with the performing arts. While many artists of the same generation gradually shifted to iconic roles, appearing in events, award ceremonies, or activities honoring legacies, Kevin Kline chose a different way of existing. He did not place himself at the center of honor events, nor did he turn old age into part of a public image. Instead, he withdrew into a quieter personal life, where art was no longer a race, but a natural part of daily life. At this age, Kevin Kline's priorities no longer lay in expanding his career, but in maintaining peace. He spent more time on family life with Phoebe Cates, keeping distance from the rushed rhythms of the entertainment industry. His choices were no longer dominated by professional expectations, but by personal needs for mental stability. In a world where many people still continued to seek attention even in the final stage of their careers, Kevin Kline chose to shrink his world, leaving only what was truly necessary. The image of Kevin Kline in his later years did not carry the color of decline or painful withdrawal, but a special kind of quiet stillness. He did not disappear from art, but he also no longer appeared regularly under the lights of the stage and big screen. He existed as an artist who had gone through almost the entire professional life cycle, and now only selectively chose moments to continue connecting with what had shaped him from very early on. Kevin Kline's aging did not come with noisy incidents or sudden changes. It happened naturally, almost imperceptible, unless one looked back at his entire journey. From a young stage actor trained in the harsh environment of Juilliard to a face who once won an Oscar, then became an artist who chose to stand outside the main flow of Hollywood, and finally a man in his 70s living in deliberate quietness. In this phase, his value was no longer measured by the number of roles or the level of media appearance, but by the very consistency of his life. He did not chase the rejuvenation of his image, did not try to maintain a peak-era Kevin Kline version, and did not seek to prolong past glory. Instead, he accepted the change of time as a natural part of the artistic journey. The image of an artist aging in quietness like Kevin Kline brought a very different feeling compared to the stories usually seen in Hollywood. There was no collapse, no tragedy, no loss of glamour in the negative sense, only a gradual shrinking of public space and an expansion of inner space. He was no longer the center of attention, but still a foundational presence in the history of American acting. At the age of 78, Kevin Kline was not defined by what he was doing, but by the entire journey he had gone through. A journey that did not explode in the typical Hollywood narrative, but also did not fade into oblivion. A journey of consistent choice, of art not completely commercialized, and of a person who had learned to live with silence as a natural part of himself. When looking back at Kevin Kline's entire journey in the later stage of his life, the biggest question was no longer how many awards he had achieved, or how many films he had appeared in, but what is success in art when success does not come with noise? In an industry like Hollywood, where fame is often measured by media coverage, box office revenue, and frequency of public appearance, Kevin Kline represented a completely different definition of success, a definition that did not need the amplification of lights to exist. Throughout his career, Kevin Kline had never fully stepped into the typical mold of a mainstream film star. Even though he had once reached the peak with A Fish Called Wanda and won the prestigious Oscar, he did not turn those moments into a foundation to build a commercial empire in Hollywood. Instead, he continued to maintain his own professional orbit, where every choice was weighed based on artistic value rather than commercial potential. This choice made him a special case, an artist who achieved the highest fame but did not let fame define his entire life. When placing Kevin Kline next to the usual success standards of Hollywood, the difference became clearer over time. Many actors of his generation were remembered through iconic mainstream roles, blockbuster films, or long periods of box office dominance. They were measured by the level of continuous presence in mainstream culture. But Kevin Kline did not follow that path. He did not build his career based on maintaining a star image at all times, but based on choosing projects that he believed had real artistic value, even if they did not guarantee wide reach. The comparison between mainstream fame and long-term value in Kevin Kline's case became particularly important when looking back over time. Mainstream fame was often cyclical, dependent on trends, tastes, and the rapid changes of the entertainment industry. It could explode strongly in a short period, but could also fade quickly when the market shifted. Meanwhile, the artistic value that Kevin Kline pursued was more sustainable, less dependent on timing, and often re-evaluated in depth as time passed. His roles did not necessarily always stand at the center of mainstream culture, but were viewed by professionals and those in the industry as models of technique and inner control. Kevin Kline never tried to chase the success standards that Hollywood set for an Oscar-winning star. He did not step into a continuous chain of blockbusters, did not build his personal image based on mainstream media, and did not seek to maintain continuous presence to consolidate fame. Instead, he kept a certain distance from the star system, allowing his career to develop at its own pace, unbound by external expectations. This sometimes caused him to be seen as not typical, but at the same time, it helped him maintain a rare consistency in an industry that was always changing. The artistic value in Kevin Kline's case therefore went beyond ordinary commercial measures. He was not defined only by box office revenue or the popularity of each film, but by the way he approached roles, the way he controlled emotions, and the way he maintained subtlety in every expressive choice. These elements did not always create immediate effects with mainstream audiences, but they created a foundation of long-term value, where each role could be looked back on with different evaluations over time. When the career of Kevin Kline is looked back on from the perspective of time, a different image gradually emerges. He was not a star defined by short-term explosion, but an artist defined by persistence and consistency. The periods when he chose to withdraw from the center of Hollywood were no longer seen as failing to seize opportunities, but understood as part of a deliberate artistic choice. The fact that he did not pursue commercial dominance did not diminish the value of his career. On the contrary, it created another layer of meaning, a career not limited by the cycle of fame. Over time, Hollywood also changed the way it viewed artists like Kevin Kline. As film trends continuously fluctuated and as many mainstream stars gradually disappeared from the spotlight after a short time, sustainable careers like his began to be reevaluated with deeper respect, not because he was always at the center of every attention, but because he had maintained an artistic standard that did not depend on market changes. At this stage of his life and career, Kevin Kline became an example for a larger question that the entertainment industry always had to face: whether success necessarily had to come with noise or not. The answer in his case seemed to be no. He proved that it was possible to reach the peak of art, to be recognized by professionals, and to maintain a long career without needing to turn oneself into a continuously appearing mainstream icon. And precisely because of that, when looking back at Kevin Kline's entire journey, people did not only see an actor who once won an Oscar, did not only see a face of Broadway or Hollywood, but saw a different way of existing in art. A way of existing that did not rely on noise, did not rely on showiness, but relied on consistency, personal choice, and inner value. A career that did not explode in the ordinary sense, but was sustainable in a way that as time passed, its value became clearer. When looking back at Kevin Kline's entire journey in his later years, people did not see a story built according to the familiar Hollywood formula, where peaks of fame usually came with media explosions or amplified tragedies. Instead, his life resembled a long, quiet, but persistent flow, beginning from classical theater stages, passing through Broadway, touching the cinematic peak with A Fish Called Wanda, and then continuing to exist in a stable state, not showy, but full of artistic weight. At the age of 78, Kevin Kline was no longer mentioned as a star racing against time, but as an artist who had nearly completed his journey in his own way, without needing to break himself to achieve recognition. From the early days at Juilliard School, where he was trained in the harsh discipline of classical stage, to the years touring with the acting company performing Shakespeare across America, Kevin Kline had built an artistic foundation not based on fame, but on precision, control, and inner depth. Broadway became the place where he affirmed his position as one of the finest stage actors of his generation, while Hollywood was only a space he stepped into, completed important roles, and then left according to his own rhythm. The shift between these two worlds was not a struggle, but a rare balance, where he was never fully assimilated by any system. In the history of Broadway, Kevin Kline was remembered as an actor capable of combining classical technique with modern emotional flexibility. He did not only perform Shakespeare, he lived within the structure of Shakespeare's language with near-perfect precision, while still maintaining naturalness and expression. Meanwhile, in the history of Hollywood, he was not a box office dominating face or a mainstream cultural icon spanning decades, but one of the actors most highly regarded by professionals and peers for his technique. He existed at the intersection of two worlds, not fully belonging to either, but contributing to raising the standard of both. Kevin Kline's influence on the next generation of actors did not lie in creating a copyable style, but in proving that it was possible to build a long career without trading artistic identity for mainstream fame. Many young actors looked to him not as a model of fame, but as a model of persistence and deliberate choice. He showed that acting was not only a path to fame, but also a personal journey, where artistic value could be placed above all commercial factors. What made Kevin Kline's legacy was not noisy moments, but the consistency that stretched across many decades. He did not change himself to fit each cycle of Hollywood, did not chase trends, and did not try to maintain a star image at all costs. His career therefore carried a rare form of artistic durability, not exploding then disappearing, not rising and falling with the market, but maintaining a stable value that could be looked back on and appreciated more over time. From a broader perspective, Kevin Kline represented a type of artist that the entertainment industry always respected, but rarely defined clearly. An artist who did not need noise to be recognized. In a world where noise was often equated with success, he proved the opposite, that silence could also carry weight, that restraint could also create power, and that a career did not need to explode to become great. His legacy did not lie in box office numbers or media appearances, but in the way he reshaped the concept of a successful actor. He showed that it was possible to reach the peak of art, to win prestigious awards, and still keep the right to choose to live and work in one's own way, not completely dominated by the entertainment industry system. When looking back from the end point of the journey, Kevin Kline was no longer a figure defined by each career phase, but the sum of all the choices he had made, choosing the stage instead of only chasing film, choosing depth instead of coverage, choosing stability instead of explosion, and choosing silence instead of noise. Those very choices created a legacy not easily visible immediately, but the longer one looked, the clearer and deeper it became. At the age of 78, Kevin Kline did not need any further affirmation of his value. Broadway history had recorded him. Hollywood history had recognized him in its own way, and the next generation of actors continued to see him as proof that art did not necessarily have to come with noise to become immortal. And perhaps that was the most important thing. An artist who had lived his life fully without losing his essence and left a legacy built not from explosion, but from persistence, consistency, and artistic choices that never changed with time. Looking back at Kevin Kline's entire journey from the early days of training in the harsh discipline of Juilliard School to the years touring with the acting company, then stepping to the cinematic peak with A Fish Called Wanda and the Oscar statue, one could not help but feel a very special kind of sadness. Not the sadness of loss or tragedy, but the sadness of a person who always stood at the edge of the light, even when he had touched it. Kevin Kline was not the type of artist swallowed by Hollywood, nor the person who collapsed because of fame, but the one who quietly stepped out of the center of that very fame. He chose Broadway instead of blockbusters, chose the quiet stage instead of the dazzling red carpet, chose artistic depth instead of commercial explosion. That made his life carry a sad beauty, a genius who never chased the noise of the world, but also never fully belonged to that world. His career, when viewed from the Hollywood perspective, could be seen as not explosive, but when looked at more deeply, it was a rare, persistent journey, where artistic value was always placed above fame. He did not build scandals, did not seek attention, did not let himself become a product of the media, but kept himself in his own orbit, where each role was a deliberate choice. That very consistency created a quiet but profound legacy, making him a model for artists who valued identity more than the lights. From the story of Kevin Kline, people can draw a clear lesson for American audiences today. Success does not necessarily have to come with noise. In a society that always pushes people to appear more, stand out more, and attract more attention, Kevin Kline reminds us that real value can exist in silence, and a fulfilled life does not need to be proven by continuous applause. Sometimes, choosing to slow down, choosing depth instead of glamour, is actually the most sustainable form of success that a person can achieve. If the story about Kevin Kline has touched you, please hit subscribe so we can continue exploring the deep and quiet lives of artists behind the lights of Hollywood. Thank you for accompanying us, and see you again in the next video, where we will continue to listen to the non-noisy but heavy stories of legends.